Such a joyful and at the same time tranquil morning, a bit of a respite after the frenzy of the build-up to Christmas and all of the things that happen around this time. I see a few bleary eyes this morning. I know for some of us it feels like it's later in the day than 11 o'clock because this is the one day of the year, if you have kids, you know they're going to get up before you, and that means you're going to have to get up too. But now that Santa has arrived and the presents have been opened, we can take a breath and we can relax. We can let go of all those things that have come to define the season but are extraneous, and we can simply be with Jesus and be with each other in this beautiful cathedral church and to hear the story of Christmas. Now, if you ask any child this question, when was Jesus born, they will say, Jesus was born today on Christmas. But as we heard in the prologue to the Gospel according to John, that question is something of a trick question. This most philosophical of the Gospels tells us that Christ was in the beginning with God and was God, and that all reality came into being through Christ. Christ is constitutive of the eternal Godhead, the eternal Word, divine wisdom of one being with the Father. Incarnated on Christmas, yes. Foretold by the Baptists, true. And yet, with the Creator existing from before time and beyond all time and space, and therefore able to redeem a fallen world, saving this broken humanity by becoming part of it on Christmas. John tells us he came to bring light and life into the world. And we have that light and that life this Christmas morning. So for John, Jesus' arrival is a cosmic event. It's an ontological event. The emptying of the divine God self and humbling of God, becoming human, just like us, just like you and me. This is what we celebrate, a birth that begins a narrative of salvation that leads from the Nativity today through Good Friday and to Easter resurrection, but that is all yet to come. Today we celebrate the birth of the promise, the earthly beginning of the sacrificial love of God for all humanity. Now, embedded in John's philosophical and almost poetic understanding that we read today is another understanding that is intrinsic to the story. And it is a more raw story. It's a more human story of Christmas, and it's embodied in the peculiar type of humanity that God selected. And that is what I want to talk about now. We all know the details of Christmas. We know them well from St. Luke and St. Matthew's Gospels. And their very familiarity can prevent us from hearing of what was then and is today for us a shocking story. So I'd like to visit this story again of the Nativity and the Holy Family to find its universal meaning for a world that sorely needs its message of light and life. Now, when we think of a family worthy of the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, we think of royal dynasties, perhaps like the Tudors, or the Windsors, or the Bourbons. In Jesus' day, it was quite the same, and Jesus is even posited as of the lineage and the house of David, who was a king, which is why Mary and Joseph had to travel to Bethlehem that fateful starry night to be counted for the census. But, in fact, we are told that Mary was unmarried and was pregnant, and not by Joseph. And Joseph himself, by tradition, was not of an aristocratic class, but a working class, a carpenter. And we read that Joseph was humiliated by Mary's condition, but he was also a decent guy. He was planning to dismiss Mary quietly later. That is, until an angel came to him in a dream, a vision. So let's be clear about the nativity story. When Mary and Joseph traveled to Bethlehem, it was as an unmarried, pregnant couple of limited financial means. And that is the real reason why they didn't find any room at the inn. So much for Joseph's kingly lineage. I want you to think about this. If the stigma of being an unwed mother is great now, just imagine what it was like for Mary and Joseph in their day. Mary was pregnant and on the verge of giving birth, yet so great was the shame that no one would let them stay under their roof, an unthinkable violation of ancient Near Eastern hospitality culture, let alone normal human decency. So the Holy Family was forced into a barn to give birth. And we've sanitized this part of the story too. We've prettified the reality with the warmth of the crèche scene and cuddly animals. You know, Luke uses the terms wrapped in swaddling clothes. That is Bible speak for rags. Laid in a manger, that means placed in a trough for feeding animals. So when I imagine the reality of this scene of the birth of Jesus, my mind goes to my own grandmother's story, my grandmother Minnie, who during World War II, even though an American citizen and only a girl, was rounded up with 120,000 other Japanese Americans on the west coast of the U.S. and incarcerated behind the barbed wire of a so-called internment camp. She and her sisters were initially placed behind barbed wire at the Puyallup racetrack outside of Seattle. They were given bedding and told to stuff it with straw, and they were pointed at a horse stall and told, "This is going to be your home." Now, Grandmother Minnie lived to almost 100, but she never got that smell and the indignity of the horse stall out of her head. So this is the reality. This is what Jesus was born into. But it is at this very point, in this very humble person and family and circumstances, that John tells us light and life are delivered into the world. And don't forget the reason for their sojourn to Bethlehem. There was a census that would later in the Bible narrative be used to track down and kill every male child under the age of 2 because of the prophecy given to King Herod that a king greater than him, greater than all others, would be born. And so in the Matthew version, Joseph is given another dream. He's warned of Herod's bloody intentions. So he and Mary and the baby Jesus flee to, of all places, Egypt, that land of Israel's historical bondage, just to get out of Herod's sphere of influence. That's how bad it was. It was so bad that Jesus, Mary, and Joseph had to go back into Pharaoh's land. So Jesus and the Holy Family were, on top of everything else, refugees. They seek asylum from a genocidal Roman government and a tyrant king. They are poor, they are homeless, they are publicly outcast, and they are morally shunned. And this is the message at the heart of what we celebrate today, that it is this family, of all families in the world, God chose to be family for God's Son. God could have chosen the rich, the powerful, the connected. Instead, God sends Jesus to begin life in this vulnerable and most precarious of situations. Jesus begins his life as he lives his life, a life along the margins, a life of solidarity with the disenfranchised and the despised. Why? Because Jesus is one of them. He brings gospel light and life to a broken world. And he preaches, as he grows, a beatific message of hope, where the lowly will be raised up, the merciful will receive mercy, the persecuted will see justice, and the peacemakers will be granted peace. You know, some people disparagingly refer to this way of thinking as the social gospel. Even last week, perhaps you read the column in the New York Times saying that this very form of religious faith and even mainline Christianity is going away. Well, I don't call this the social gospel. I call it the gospel. This is the gospel. And I do not think that Jesus' clarion call is on the wane. I think there is a whole world outside those Ghiberti doors that is hungering for the message of love and hope of Christmas. Love and hope actualized in service and in life to the least amongst us of the Christmas story. So this is the real reason and the real meaning of Christ's birth. It's the message preached here at Grace Cathedral every Sunday. And it is lived out every day here at Grace Cathedral in our numerous ministries and programs, especially here today with you at Grace. This beautiful sanctuary is an historical place. It is historical for a number of reasons. It's beautiful architecture, which draws the spirit up when you enter into this building, for the awe-inspiring stained glass that surrounds us and the other art, for the soul-stirring music that we enjoy as we raise our voices in thanksgiving. But most of all, this has and always will be a pulpit and a place of radical inclusion, with a message of hope that life and light are found in Jesus. And we will preach that message when it is not popular and when it is not easy, especially when it's not popular and when it is not easy. Now, the church and Grace Cathedral do not have all the answers. We read the news and we know that we inhabit a complicated and sometimes treacherous world. Now, reading the infancy narrative with fresh eyes, we see that it was the same for Jesus right from the very start. Nothing new under the sun, as Ecclesiastes says. And yet, because of Jesus this morn, we have that illumination of light and life. Christmas has established it this morning and instituted eternity as our guide. Jesus points a way. He embodies a way of life, one of compassion and empathy. He points to vulnerability and openness to others as a way of life, to a beatific world that is implicitly here now, where the lowly are raised up and where there are no insiders and outsiders, just one inclusive human family united under Christ's love. So this peaceful Christmas morning, I invite all of you online and here present to join us every week at Grace Cathedral, where we are all imperfect seekers of the just kingdom that Jesus not only preached, but was born into this day. Let's walk the life of faith together, day by day in 2023, and let's lift each other up when we stumble. I wish you this morning a very Merry Christmas. Amen.